My parents adopted another kid right after my twin died in a house fire and started calling him by my twin's name. When I found evidence, they set the fire themselves. They tried to have me institutionalized for disturbing the family. The new boy was sitting at Owen's place at the breakfast table when I came downstairs on a Monday morning. He was eating Owen's favorite cereal from Owen's bowl, wearing Owen's old sweatshirt that still smelled like smoke from the fire that had killed my twin brother 3 weeks ago. My mother turned from the stove with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Declan. Say hello to your brother. This is Owen." The words hit me like a physical blow. The boy looked up, and he had brown eyes instead of Owen's green ones, darker hair instead of Owen's sandy blonde, a rounder face instead of Owen's sharp features. He looked nothing like my twin brother. But my mother was smiling at him like he was exactly who she said he was, and my father was reading the newspaper without acknowledging the insanity of what was happening. Owen and I had been identical in every way that mattered. Same height, same build, same voice that our teachers could never tell apart on the phone. We'd had our own language as kids, finishing each other's sentences, knowing what the other was thinking without speaking. The night before he died, we'd stayed up until midnight, talking about college, about getting away from our parents, about the life we'd build. He'd been excited about MIT, about finally having the freedom to become who he wanted to be. And now there was this stranger sitting in his chair, and my parents expected me to pretend the past 17 years had never happened. I'd been at my friend's house the night of the fire, the night that our detached garage, which my parents had converted into a bedroom for Owen, had gone up in flames while he slept. The fire department had said it was an electrical issue, old wiring, tragic accident. Owen had died from smoke inhalation before the flames ever reached him. They'd said he never woke up, never knew what was happening. I'd been 17 years old, standing in my friend's driveway at 2 a.m, watching the missed calls pile up on my phone before I finally answered to hear my mother screaming that Owen was gone, that our twin brother, my other half, the person who'd known me better than anyone, was dead. The drive home had been a blur. Police lights, fire trucks, neighbors standing in their yards watching our garage burn. The structure had been separate from the main house, set back near the property line. My parents had converted it 2 years ago when Owen and I started fighting for space. He'd been so excited about having his own room, his own privacy. I'd been jealous at first, until I realized how cold it got out there in winter, how the heater barely worked. Owen had never complained, had just piled on extra blankets and called it his fortress. Now, his fortress was ashes. I'd arrived to find my mother collapsed on the front lawn, my father standing with the fire chief, both of them covered in soot. They'd tried to reach him, they said. The smoke had been too thick. By the time the firefighters got inside, it was too late. Owen was already gone. And now, 3 weeks later, there was a strange boy in his chair being called by his name. "That's not Owen," I'd said. My voice had come out strangled. "That's not my brother." Mom had kept smiling. "Of course it is, sweetie. This is Owen. He's part of our family now." I'd looked at my father. "Dad?" My father had finally lowered his newspaper. His face had been blank, carefully neutral. "Declan, your mother and I have made a decision about what's best for this family. We've adopted Owen to help us heal. We thought it would be easier for everyone if we moved forward together. But his name isn't Owen. His name is," the boy had started to say, and my mother had cut him off sharply. "His name is Owen. We've discussed this." She'd looked at me then, and her expression had gone hard. "We're not going to dwell on the past. We're not going to wallow in grief. We're going to be a family again. This is Owen, and you're going to treat him as your brother." I'd backed away from the table. "This is insane. You can't just replace him." "We're not replacing anyone," Dad had said. "We're healing. There's a difference." The boy, this stranger wearing my dead brother's clothes, had looked at me with something like pity, something like understanding, but he'd said nothing. I'd left for school without eating, driven with my hands shaking on the wheel, sat through classes without hearing a word. Everyone had been treating me differently since the fire. Sympathy, awkward condolences, people not knowing what to say. They'd all known Owen and me as a unit, the Hartwell twins, inseparable since birth. And now one of us was gone, and the other was losing his mind. That afternoon, I'd come home to find the boy in Owen's room. My parents had cleaned it out in the days after the funeral, boxed up his belongings, repainted the walls, made it generic, and now this stranger was unpacking a suitcase, putting his things in Owen's dresser, hanging his clothes in Owen's closet. I'd stood in the doorway watching. "Who are you?" He'd turned. His face had been sad, resigned. "My name's Elliot. I'm 12. Your parents adopted me from Clearwater Group Home last week. They'd told me your brother died, but they never said they were going to call me by his name." Elliot. Finally, some truth. "Why did you agree to this?" He'd sat on the bed, Owen's bed, that my parents had stripped and remade with new sheets. "I didn't really have a choice. I've been in the system since I was 8. Your parents seemed nice. They had a nice house. I thought this was going to be a fresh start." He'd looked at me. "I didn't know they were going to try to replace their dead son. They're insane." Elliot had nodded slowly. "Maybe, but they're the ones with the power. I learned a long time ago that adults don't listen to kids, especially kids like me." "What happens if you refuse to answer to Owen's name?" "I already tried. Your mom got really upset, started crying. Your dad said if I couldn't cooperate, they'd have to reconsider the adoption. Send me back to the home. So you're just going along with it?" Elliot had looked away. "I've been in 7 foster homes. I've been in 3 group homes. This is the nicest place I've ever lived. If they want to call me Owen, if that's the price of having a real family, then yeah, I'm going along with it. I'd felt sick. They're using you. Maybe. But I'm using them too. I get a home. They get to pretend their son didn't die. Everyone gets what they need. Not everyone. I don't get my brother back." Elliot had met my eyes. "I know. And I'm sorry. But I'm not leaving." I'd left his room and gone to mine. Locked the door. Pulled out the box I'd saved from Owen's belongings before my parents had thrown everything away. Photos, his journal, the watch our grandfather had given him, pieces of my brother that I wasn't ready to lose. I'd held his journal, the leather worn from years of use. Owen had written in it every day. Thoughts, observations, complaints about our parents. We'd been saving for months to move out together after graduation. Owen had been counting the days until we could leave, until we'd be free from the constant tension in this house. I'd flipped through the pages, looking for something, though I didn't know what. The last entry was from the day before he died. Parents acting weird. Mom keeps hugging me too tight. Dad asked me questions about the future, about what I wanted to do after graduation. Then he got sad when I answered. "Think they're having some kind of crisis. Hope they're okay." I'd read it 3 times. The words felt wrong, felt like they meant something I couldn't grasp. Owen had been perceptive. If he'd thought something was off, something probably was. I remembered that last night with him now, remembered him mentioning that Mom had been acting strange. I'd dismissed it, thought he was overthinking. But Owen had sensed something, had known on some level that he was in danger, and I'd been too blind to see it. That night at dinner, my parents had kept calling Elliot by Owen's name. "Owen, pass the salt." "Owen, how was your first day at your new school?" "Owen, we're so glad you're here." Elliot had responded each time, playing his role, earning his place. And I'd sat there watching my family perform an elaborate charade, wondering if I was the only sane person left. After dinner, I'd gone back to Owen's journal, read through the last month of entries, and I'd started to notice a pattern. 3 weeks before the fire. Parents asked me about life insurance today. Weird question. Said they were updating their policies. 2 weeks before, Mom seemed really stressed about money. Heard her and Dad arguing in their room. Something about debts and payments due. 1 week before, Dad asked if I'd updated my beneficiary information on the college scholarship. Said it was important for legal reasons. I didn't really understand. 3 days before, found Mom looking at my scholarship papers. She looked guilty when she saw me, said she was just proud of how much I'd accomplished. The entries painted a picture I didn't want to see. A picture of parents who'd been asking their son about money and insurance and beneficiaries right before he'd died in a convenient fire. I'd grabbed my laptop, searched for Owen's scholarship information. He'd won the Aldridge Science Scholarship the year before, a full ride to MIT worth $280,000. It had been his pride, his ticket out of our middle-class suburb to something bigger. I'd found the scholarship website, read the terms, and there, in the fine print, in the event of the recipient's death before matriculation, the full scholarship amount will be paid to the designated beneficiary. Owen had listed our parents as his beneficiaries because he'd been 16 when he'd applied, because the form had required an adult, because he'd never imagined he wouldn't be alive to use the scholarship himself. My hands had started shaking. I'd searched for more information, found the insurance policy our parents had taken out on both of us when we turned 16, $500,000 for each twin. In case of accidental death, the parents would receive the full payout. I'd done the math. $280,000 from the scholarship, $500,000 from insurance, $780,000 reasons for my parents to kill their son. But that was insane. Parents didn't murder their children for money. Parents grieved. Parents suffered. Parents didn't adopt replacement children and start calling them by their dead son's name within 3 weeks. Unless they did. Unless I was living with people capable of exactly that. I'd needed proof. Something concrete. The fire marshal's report had called it an electrical fire. Old wiring in the converted garage. But Owen had complained about the wiring before. Had told our parents multiple times that the lights flickered, that the outlet sparked, that something was wrong. They'd promised to get it fixed. They'd never called an electrician. I'd pulled up the fire marshal's report online, read through the technical details. The fire had started in the electrical panel. The wiring had been old, but the report noted something else. Evidence of accelerant near the origin point. But the final conclusion had been accidental because there was no clear motive. No evidence of foul play beyond the chemical traces that could have been from stored materials. Stored materials. I'd gone down to the ruins of the garage the next day. The structure had been demolished, cleared away. But I'd searched through the remaining debris in the dumpster the construction company had left. Found pieces of charred wood, melted metal, destroyed belongings. And there, at the bottom, I'd found something. A plastic jug, half melted with a faded label. Paint thinner. We'd never kept paint thinner in the garage. Owen hadn't painted. My parents had done all the painting in the main house, and they'd stored their supplies in the basement. Someone had put paint thinner in Owen's room, near the electrical panel, right where it would feed a fire. I'd taken photos, collected the jug carefully, brought it back to my room, and hidden it in my closet. Evidence. Proof that someone had staged the fire to look accidental. But who would believe me? The fire marshal had already ruled it an accident. The police had closed the case. My parents were playing grieving parents while secretly replacing their dead son. If I went to the authorities and said my parents had murdered Owen, I'd sound insane, especially now that they'd adopted Elliot and were calling him Owen. It made them look like people destroyed by grief. People who loved their son so much they couldn't let go, not people who'd killed him for insurance money. That night, I'd confronted my mother. She'd been in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. Elliot had been upstairs, and my father had been in his study. I'd closed the kitchen door behind me. We need to talk about Owen. My mother had smiled that bright, empty smile. Of course, sweetie. Owen's adjusting wonderfully. I think this is going to be so good for our family. Not Elliot. Owen. My actual brother. The one who died. My mother's smile had frozen. Declan, we've talked about this. We're moving forward. We're not dwelling on the past. You adopted a kid and started calling him by Owen's name 3 weeks after the funeral. That's not moving forward. That's psychotic. My mother had set down her dish towel. Her hands had been shaking. I know you're grieving. I know this is hard. But we're doing what's best for this family. We're healing in our own way. By pretending Owen never existed? By replacing him with some random kid? He's not random. He needed a home. We needed a son. It's perfect. You needed a son? I'd felt something dangerous building in my chest. You had 2 sons. Now you have 1. And instead of dealing with that, you're creating some kind of delusion where the replacement kid becomes the dead one. My mother had stepped closer. Lower your voice. Your father doesn't need to hear this. Does he know? I'd asked. Does Dad know that you're planning to pretend Elliot is Owen? Or is this just your psychosis? My mother's hand had moved so fast I hadn't seen it coming. The slap had cracked across my face, sharp and shocking. You don't talk to me like that. You don't question what we're doing. We're your parents. We're trying to hold this family together. And if you can't respect that, if you can't cooperate, then maybe you're the problem." I'd touched my burning cheek. "You hit me. You've never hit me before." My mother had looked at her hand like she didn't recognize it. Then she'd straightened. Sometimes children need discipline. Sometimes they need to understand that there are consequences for disrespect. I'd backed toward the door. "You killed him, didn't you? You killed Owen." My mother's face had gone completely blank. "That's a horrible thing to say. The fire marshal said it was an accident," I'd continued. "But there was accelerant, paint thinner, near the electrical panel. Someone put it there." My mother had been very still. "You're not thinking clearly. The grief has made you paranoid." "I found the jug. I have it. I have evidence." My mother's expression had shifted. Something cold had moved behind her eyes. Evidence of what? Of a tragic accident? Of old materials stored in a garage? "Declan, you're making wild accusations based on trauma and grief." I'd opened the door. "I'm going to the police." My mother had laughed. It wasn't a warm sound. "Go ahead. Tell them your grieving parents murdered their son and then adopted a replacement. Tell them you have a melted jug as proof. See how that works out for you." I'd left the kitchen, gone to my room, pulled out the jug and the photos, looked at them and realized she was right. This wasn't enough. This proved nothing except that I'd found garbage in a dumpster. I'd needed more. Over the next week, I'd searched the house, gone through my parents' belongings when they were at work, found the insurance paperwork, found the scholarship correspondence, found bank statements showing they'd been drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out, mortgage 3 months behind, car payments overdue. My parents had been on the verge of financial collapse, and then Owen had died, and suddenly they had $780,000 coming. I'd photographed everything, built a file, created a timeline, and the more I'd found, the worse it had gotten. There'd been emails between my mother and father, sent from accounts I'd found passwords for, saved on the family computer, dated 2 months before the fire. Subject line, options. The email content had been careful, coded, but the meaning had been clear. "We can't keep going like this. The house is going into foreclosure. We're going to lose everything." And the response? "The boys have policies. The scholarship. There are options if we're willing to consider them." And then, a week later, "We'd have to be careful. Make it look natural. No one could ever know. And finally, 3 days before the fire, I'll take care of it tomorrow night. Make sure Declan is at his friend's house." I'd stared at those emails until the words had blurred. My parents had planned Owen's murder, had discussed it, had executed it, had killed their own son for insurance money. And now they were pretending it had never happened. I'd saved everything to a flash drive, hidden copies in multiple locations, and I'd made a decision. I was going to the police. Evidence or not, belief or not, I had to try. The police station had been busy on a Friday afternoon. I'd waited for 30 minutes before a detective had called me back to an office. Detective Ramirez, older, tired-looking, had listened to my story with increasing skepticism. He'd looked through my printed emails, my photos, my timeline, and when I'd finished, he'd leaned back in his chair. "Son, I understand you're grieving. Losing a twin must be incredibly difficult. But what you're describing, it's not what the evidence shows. The fire was ruled accidental. The emails you've shown me, they're vague. Could mean anything. And your parents adopting a child after losing their son, that's not a crime. It's maybe unusual, but people grieve in different ways. They're calling him Owen. They're pretending he's my brother." Detective Ramirez had nodded slowly. "That's concerning. But it's not evidence of murder. It's evidence of grief, maybe unhealthy grief, but not murder. What about the debt? The insurance money? The scholarship? All of that provides motive, sure, but motive isn't proof." The fire marshal investigated thoroughly. There was no evidence of arson beyond some chemical traces that were explained by stored materials. The electrical wiring was faulty. Everything points to a tragic accident. I'd felt desperation rising. They planned it. Those emails prove they planned it. The emails are vague discussions about financial options. Without explicit admission of intent to commit arson or murder, they're not admissible as evidence of a crime. "I'm sorry, son, but there's nothing here I can investigate." I'd left the police station with my flash drive and my photographs and my certainty that my parents had killed Owen. And I'd known that no one was going to believe me. When I'd gotten home, both my parents had been waiting in the living room. My father had been holding my laptop, my personal laptop that I'd left in my room. "We need to talk," he'd said. "About what?" "About your obsession with your brother's death, about your accusations against your mother and me, about your increasingly disturbed behavior." I'd looked between them. "You went through my stuff." "We're concerned," Mom had said. "You've been acting strange, isolating yourself, making wild claims. We think you need help." "What kind of help?" Dad had set down my laptop. "We've spoken with Dr. Whitmore. He's a psychiatrist who specializes in trauma and grief. He's agreed to evaluate you. I'm not seeing a psychiatrist. You are, or we're going to have to take more serious steps." "What does that mean?" "It means," Dad had said carefully, "that we can have you placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold if we believe you're a danger to yourself or others. And right now, with your accusations, your paranoia, your obsession with conspiracy theories, we believe you're becoming a danger." They'd planned this, just like they'd planned the fire. They'd found my evidence, realized I was a threat, and now they were going to have me locked away. You can't do that. I'm 17. We're your parents. We have the right to make medical decisions on your behalf. And if you refuse treatment voluntarily, we'll have you committed involuntarily. I'd backed toward the door. "This is because I know what you did. This is because you murdered Owen, and I have proof." My mother had started crying. Right on cue. Perfectly performed. "Do you hear him, Russell? Do you hear how sick he's become? Our son is accusing us of killing his brother. He's completely delusional. He needs help before he hurts himself, or someone else." The psychiatric evaluation had been scheduled for the next morning. I'd spent the night in my room with a chair wedged under the door handle, flash drives hidden in my backpack, ready to run. But where could I run? I was 17. No money, no car they couldn't track, no one who believed me. At 8 a.m., my parents had knocked on my door. "Time to go, Declan. Dr. Whitmore is expecting us." I'd opened the door, tried to look calm, tried to play along. The drive to Dr. Whitmore's office had been silent. My parents in the front seat, me in the back, Elliot at home with a babysitter. The office had been in a medical building downtown. Clean, professional, non-threatening. Dr. Whitmore had been a man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. He'd shaken my hand, led me to his office, asked my parents to wait outside. And then he'd started asking questions. "Tell me about Owen. My brother died 3 weeks ago in a house fire." "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was. How are you coping?" I'd known this was a trap. Everything I said would be used against me. But I'd also known that refusing to talk would be seen as more evidence of disturbance. "I'm sad. I miss him. We were twins. It's like losing half of myself. That's a very profound loss. Your parents mentioned you've been having some difficult thoughts." "What kind of thoughts?" "About the fire. About what caused it." "And what do you think caused it?" I'd hesitated, then decided the truth was my only option. "I think my parents said it deliberately. I think they killed Owen for insurance money. Dr. Whitmore had written something on his pad. That's a serious accusation. Why do you believe that?" I'd explained everything. The debt, the insurance, the scholarship, the emails, the paint thinner, the timing. Dr. Whitmore had listened without interrupting, and when I'd finished, he'd asked, "Do you have evidence to support these beliefs?" "I have emails, financial records, physical evidence from the fire site." "Have you taken this evidence to the police?" "I did. Yesterday. They said it wasn't enough to investigate." "And what did your parents say when you accused them?" "They said I was disturbed, that I needed psychiatric help. They threatened to have me committed if I didn't cooperate." Dr. Whitmore had been quiet for a moment. "Declan, I'm going to be honest with you. From a clinical perspective, what you're describing could be interpreted in 2 ways. Either you're correct, and your parents committed a terrible crime, or you're experiencing a trauma-induced delusional disorder, and you've constructed a conspiracy to make sense of a senseless tragedy. Which do you think it is?" I'd met his eyes. "I know how this sounds. I know it seems crazy, but I'm not delusional. My parents killed my brother. They're covering it up. And now they're trying to silence me by having me declared mentally ill." "That's a very coherent narrative," Dr. Whitmore had said. "But coherence doesn't equal truth. Delusional people can be very logical within their delusion. I'm not delusional. then you're making an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. You've shown me circumstantial evidence, yes, but nothing definitive. Nothing that proves murder rather than a tragic accident combined with unfortunate financial circumstances and unhealthy grieving mechanisms. So you think I'm crazy. I think you're traumatized. And trauma can make us see patterns that aren't there, can make us create meaning out of chaos. Your brother died suddenly, senselessly. You're looking for a reason, for someone to blame, and your parents are the easiest target. What about Elliot? What about the fact that they adopted a kid and are calling him by Owen's name? Dr. Whitmore had nodded. That is concerning. That suggests your parents are dealing with grief in an unhealthy way. But unhealthy isn't illegal, and it doesn't prove murder. So what happens now? Now I write a report. I tell your parents what I think, and I make recommendations about your treatment. Are you going to have me committed? Dr. Whitmore had looked at me with something like sympathy. I'm going to recommend intensive outpatient therapy. You're clearly suffering. You've lost your twin. You're in pain. You need support to process that pain in a healthy way. But if you continue to make accusations against your parents, if you become a danger to yourself or to them, then yes, commitment might become necessary. I'd left his office knowing I'd lost. In the waiting room, my parents had been sitting close together, my mother's hand on my father's arm. They'd looked up when I'd emerged, their expressions perfectly concerned. Dr. Whitmore had called them into his office. I'd sat in the waiting room for 20 minutes, and when they'd come out, my father had been holding a prescription. The doctor thinks you should start medication, he'd said, for anxiety and depression, to help you process your grief. I don't want medication. It's not optional, Mom had said. Dr. Whitmore agrees that you're experiencing a trauma response that requires treatment. If you refuse, we'll have to take more serious steps. I'd taken the prescription, filled it that afternoon, and that night at dinner, my mother had watched me swallow the first pill with a satisfied smile. This is going to help you, sweetheart. You're going to start feeling better. Stop having these disturbing thoughts. The medication had made me foggy, slow. I'd slept 12 hours that first night and woken feeling disconnected from reality, which was exactly what they'd wanted. A docile, medicated son who stopped asking questions. I'd pretended to take the pills for the next 3 days, held them under my tongue, spit them out later, acted drowsy when my parents were watching, and I'd used the time to plan. I couldn't stay here. My parents had killed Owen and were going to bury me alive in medication and institutions if I kept fighting. I needed to get out, needed to get somewhere safe, needed to find someone who'd believe me. My aunt lived 3 hours away. Mom's sister, Patricia. She and my mother had been close once, years ago, before some falling out I'd never understood. Patricia had come to Owen's funeral, stood at the back, left before the reception. I'd barely spoken to her, but she was family. She might listen. I'd always liked Patricia when I was younger. She'd been the fun aunt who brought unusual birthday presents and told stories about traveling. Then one year, she'd just stopped visiting. Mom would change the subject whenever I asked about her. Dad would say it was complicated. Owen and I had speculated about what happened, but we'd never gotten answers. Now Patricia was my only hope. Someone outside my parents' control. Someone who might actually hear what I was saying. I'd packed a bag in the middle of the night. Clothes, my flash drives, printed evidence, cash I'd saved from birthday gifts. At 3 a.m., I'd climbed out my window, dropped to the garage roof, and then to the ground. The air had been cold, early autumn turning bitter. I'd walked to the bus station 6 blocks away, bought a ticket with cash, been on the road by 5 a.m. Every moment I'd expected my parents to find me, expected police cars to pull over the bus, but I'd made it. Had crossed those 3 hours into what felt like a different world. The bus ride had taken 4 hours with stops. I'd kept my phone off, knowing my parents could track it. When I'd finally arrived in Riverside, Patricia's town, it had been almost 10 a.m. I'd walked to her address, the one I'd found in an old address book in my mother's desk. The house had been small, neat, with a garden in front. I'd knocked on the door. Patricia had answered in yoga pants and a t-shirt, coffee mug in hand. She'd stared at me for a long moment, and I'd seen recognition, shock, and then concern flash across her face. When she opened the door wider, I'd noticed her hands were shaking. "Declan? Aunt Patricia, can I come in?" She'd looked past me, like she expected my parents to appear. "Where are your parents?" "That's complicated. Can we talk? Inside?" Patricia had stepped aside. I'd entered her house, small and cluttered with books and plants, and felt the first hint of safety I'd experienced in weeks. We'd sat at her kitchen table. She'd made me tea, and then she'd said, "Tell me everything." I'd told her. Everything. The fire, the evidence, the emails, the insurance, Elliot, the medication, the psychiatrist. I'd shown her my flash drives, my photographs, my documentation, and unlike everyone else, Patricia had believed me, because she'd known something about my parents that I hadn't. "Your mother has always been capable of terrible things," Patricia had said when I'd finished. "When we were kids, she hurt my cat. Deliberately. Made it look like an accident. When I confronted her, she lied so convincingly that our parents punished me for making accusations. She's always been able to manipulate people, make herself look like the victim. Why did you stop talking to her?" Patricia had looked away. 5 years ago, she asked me for money, said she was in debt, desperate. I loaned her $50,000. She never paid me back. When I asked about it, she claimed she'd already repaid me, showed our parents fake bank records, made me look like I was lying. We haven't spoken since. "So you believe me?" "I believe you because I know what your mother is, and I believe your father is either complicit or under her control. Either way, your brother is dead, and you're in danger. What do I do?" Patricia had stood up. "First, you stay here. You're safe. I won't let them take you. Second, we get real legal help, a lawyer who specializes in wrongful death and family law. Third, we get this evidence properly analyzed. I have a friend who's a forensic specialist. If there's proof in these emails or that jug, he'll find it. Can we really prove it? We can try. But Declan, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we can't, that the evidence isn't strong enough, that your parents get away with it. What happens then? Then we make sure you're safe. That's the priority, keeping you alive." Patricia had called her lawyer friend that afternoon, Bernard Castaneda, a man in his 60s who'd handled dozens of criminal cases. He'd come to Patricia's house that evening, reviewed my evidence with a careful eye. When he'd finished, he'd looked at me seriously. "This is compelling. But it's not conclusive. The emails are vague enough that they could be explained away. The paint thinner could have been stored materials. The financial motive is strong, but not proof of murder. However," I'd leaned forward. "However, if we can prove that your parents are now trying to have you involuntarily committed to silence you, that's witness intimidation. That's obstruction. And that might be enough to reopen the investigation into your brother's death. How do we prove it?" Bernard had pulled out his phone. "We document everything, record conversations, get the medication bottle analyzed to see what they're actually giving you, collect evidence of their attempts to control you, and we file for emancipation, get you legally free from their control so they can't have you committed. I'm 17. Can I be emancipated? If we can prove that your parents are unfit and that you're capable of supporting yourself, yes. Patricia will be your guardian temporarily. We'll build a case." The process had taken 2 weeks. In that time, my parents had reported me missing, filed a missing persons report, called Patricia and demanded I come home. Patricia had told them I was safe, that I was staying with her, that I wasn't coming back. My mother had threatened legal action. My father had claimed I'd been kidnapped. Bernard had filed the emancipation petition with the evidence of attempted involuntary commitment, the inappropriate medication, the unsafe home environment. And then he'd done something else. He'd contacted the fire marshal, presented the evidence I'd collected, asked for the case to be reopened. The fire marshal had been skeptical, but Bernard had been persuasive. And 2 days after the emancipation hearing was scheduled, the fire marshal had announced a new investigation into Owen's death. The news had spread fast. My parents had released a statement through their own lawyer. "Our son is troubled, grieving, making wild accusations because he can't accept his brother's accidental death. We're heartbroken that he's been turned against us by family members with ulterior motives. We just want him home, safe, where he belongs." The emancipation hearing had been scheduled for a Friday morning. I'd worn a suit Patricia had bought me, sat next to Bernard at a table facing the judge. My parents had been on the other side with their lawyer, a woman named Dorothy Finch, who'd made a career of defending the indefensible. The judge had been a woman in her 50s, Judge Ramona Whitfield, known for being no-nonsense and impatient with manipulation. She'd read through the filings, looked at both sides, and said, "I'm going to hear from the minor first. Declan, please tell me why you're seeking emancipation." I'd stood, told my story, explained about Owen's death, the evidence I'd found, my parents' attempts to silence me, shown the judge my documentation. Ms. Finch had objected repeatedly. Hearsay, speculation, leading questions. But Judge Whitfield had let me finish. And when I'd sat down, she'd looked at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, you adopted a child shortly after your son's death. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," my mother had said. "We were devastated by our loss. We wanted to help another child. We wanted to heal as a family. And you've been calling this adopted child by your deceased son's name?" My mother had hesitated. "We gave him Owen's name." "Yes, as a way to honor Owen's memory." "That's not honoring memory," Judge Whitfield had said. "That's replacement. That's refusing to accept death." She'd looked at my father. "And you supported this?" My father had nodded. "We thought it would help with the grief." "Help who?" the judge had asked. "You. Because I don't see how calling a new child by a dead child's name helps anyone except parents who can't face reality." Ms. Finch had stood. "Your Honor, with respect, how my clients grieve is not relevant to whether their son should be emancipated." Judge Whitfield had fixed her with a hard look. "It's absolutely relevant. Because it speaks to their judgment and their ability to put their children's needs above their own." She'd turned back to me. "Declan, you claim your parents tried to have you involuntarily committed. Can you prove that?" I'd presented the paperwork from Dr. Whitmore, the medication they'd forced me to take, the threats they'd made, and I'd played a recording I'd made on my phone before I'd left. A recording of my mother saying, "If you don't stop with these accusations, we'll have you locked up. We'll tell everyone you're dangerous, and no one will ever believe you again." The recording had been shaky, partially muffled, but her words had been clear. Judge Whitfield had listened to it twice. Then she'd looked at my parents. "Would you like to explain that?" My mother had gone pale. That was taken out of context. I was frustrated. "I didn't mean—" "It sounds very much like a threat to me," the judge had interrupted. "It sounds like a parent trying to intimidate and control their child. And combined with the adoption of a replacement child, the forced medication, and the attempt to have Declan psychiatrically evaluated after he made accusations against you, I'm seeing a pattern of parents who value their own comfort over their children's well-being." Ms. Finch had tried to object, but Judge Whitfield had held up her hand. "I'm granting the emancipation. Effective immediately. Declan Hartwell is now legally free from his parents' control. He will reside with Patricia Hartwell, who will serve as his guardian until he reaches 18. His parents are prohibited from contacting him without his consent. This hearing is adjourned." I'd felt something unlock in my chest. Relief. Validation. Safety. My mother had started crying. Loud, dramatic sobs that echoed through the courtroom. My father had just sat there, stone-faced. And Elliot, I'd realized, hadn't been brought to the hearing. They'd left him at home, still playing the role of Owen, still trapped in their delusion. The fire marshal's reinvestigation had moved slowly. They'd brought in arson specialists, re-examined the electrical panel, tested the paint thinner jug I'd found, and 6 weeks after the emancipation hearing, they'd released their findings. The fire had been deliberately set. The paint thinner had been placed near the electrical panel. The panel had been tampered with to create a spark. Someone had staged it to look like an accident, while ensuring it would be fatal. The evidence pointed to arson, to murder. The police had arrested my parents on a Wednesday morning, both charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The news had exploded. Local family, grieving parents, revealed to be killers. The story had been everywhere. Elliot had been removed from their custody immediately, placed back in foster care. I'd visited him once, at the group home where he'd been staying. He'd looked smaller somehow, defeated. "I'm sorry," I'd said, "for everything that happened to you." Elliot had shrugged. "Not your fault. They used both of us. What's going to happen to them?" "I don't know. Trial, probably prison." He'd been quiet. Then, "I'm sorry about Owen." about what they did. Thank you. You ever going to tell me who I really am? Or am I stuck being Owen forever? You're Elliot, I'd said. Just Elliot. That's enough. The trial had taken 8 months. In that time, I'd lived with Patricia, finished high school, applied to colleges, tried to rebuild a life from the ruins my parents had left. The prosecution's case had been built on the evidence I'd collected. The emails, the financial records, the tampered electrical panel, the paint thinner. The defense had tried to claim it was all circumstantial. That grief had driven my parents to make poor decisions, but not to murder. The jury had deliberated for 2 days, guilty on all counts. My mother had screamed when the verdict was read. My father had just closed his eyes. During the trial, I'd had to testify. Had to sit in the witness box while my mother's lawyer tried to paint me as a disturbed teenager who'd fabricated evidence out of grief. She'd brought up the psychiatric evaluation, the medication, my obsessive behavior. She'd tried to suggest I'd planted the paint thinner myself, that I'd created the emails, that I'd destroyed my own family because I couldn't handle Owen's death. But Bernard had been ready. He'd brought in digital forensics experts who proved the emails were authentic, created months before Owen died. He'd presented testimony from the fire marshal explaining how the electrical panel had been deliberately sabotaged. He'd shown the jury my parents' bank statements, the mounting debt, the insurance policies they'd increased just weeks before the fire, and he'd played the recording of my mother threatening to have me institutionalized. The jury had seen through my parents' performance, seen the calculation behind their grief, and they'd delivered justice. The sentencing had been harsh. 25 years to life for my mother, 20 years to life for my father. They'd be old if they ever got out, and Owen would still be dead. I'd attended the sentencing hearing, sat in the back row, watched my parents learn the cost of their choices. The judge had spoken about the sacred trust between parents and children, about how my parents had violated that trust in the worst possible way, about how they'd murdered their own son and then tried to destroy their surviving son to cover their crime. And then she'd looked at me. Declan Hartwell has lost his brother and his parents. He'll carry that loss for the rest of his life. But he had the courage to seek truth even when everyone told him he was wrong. That takes remarkable strength. I hope he finds peace. I'd left the courthouse with Patricia, driven back to her house, and that night, I'd opened Owen's journal one last time, read his last entry again. Parents acting weird. The words that had started this all, that had led me to evidence, that had saved my life. I miss you, I'd whispered to my dead brother. Every day. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. The journal sat on my desk, a reminder, a memorial, and every morning when I woke up, I saw it and remembered that Owen had been real, had been loved, had been murdered, but not forgotten, never forgotten. 3 years after the trial, I started college on Owen's scholarship. MIT had honored it, transferred it to me after learning the truth. I studied engineering, like Owen had planned to. Sometimes walked the campus and imagined him beside me, wondered what he'd say about my classes, my friends, my life. Patricia visited often, became more mother than aunt, helped me heal. Elliot sent me a card on my 18th birthday. He'd been adopted by a family in another state, changed his name legally, was starting over for real. I'm not Owen anymore, he'd written. Thanks for remembering that. I graduated last year, top of my class, everything Owen should have been. And when I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I carried his watch in my pocket, the one our grandfather had given him, the one my parents hadn't managed to destroy. The ceremony had been bittersweet. I'd looked out at the audience and seen Patricia cheering, saw friends I'd made, saw professors who'd supported me. But I'd also seen the empty seat where Owen should have been graduating beside me, wearing his own cap and gown, celebrating his own achievements. We'd planned this together as kids, had promised each other we'd make it out, make something of ourselves. I'd kept that promise for both of us. The nightmares had finally started to fade by then. The dreams where I was back in that house, where I could smell the smoke, where I was running toward the garage but could never reach it in time. Therapy had helped. Patricia had helped. Time had helped. But the guilt still lingered. The feeling that I should have known, should have seen, should have saved him. My therapist kept telling me it wasn't my fault. that I was a victim too, that I couldn't have prevented what my parents had planned. But some part of me would always wonder if there was something I'd missed, some warning sign I'd ignored, some way I could have changed the outcome. They're still in prison, eligible for parole in 10 more years. I've already written letters to the parole board, explaining why they should never be released, explaining the damage they did, the life they stole, the brother I lost. But I'm not waiting for parole hearings to live. I'm building the future Owen didn't get to have. I'm being successful enough for both of us. And every day I remember that I survived what my parents tried to do. I found the truth. I got justice. And Owen's death wasn't meaningless. His death exposed monsters, protected others, changed laws about how fire investigations are conducted. 27 states now require secondary reviews when children die in house fires and parents have large insurance policies. It's called Owen's Law, my brother's legacy, the thing that makes his loss hurt a little less. He saved other children by dying. His death meant something, and I'm making sure it continues to mean something. By living, by thriving, by remembering. That's all I can do, but it's enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.